hard to see all of you guys out there, but welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karina and everyone at the Speakeasy and Wanderlust Festival for hosting all of us. Such an amazing movement in the yoga world and building our global kula. And definitely a huge prayer of gratitude to Naropa Institute, not only for sponsoring these, but really for holding the light and being such a visionary in the work that we both do as contemplative psychotherapists and bringing body-based and spirituality-based psychology to the world in such an amazing way. So thank you, everyone at Naropa. I can't see too much, but how many of you are actually yoga teachers here in the room? Okay, and then are there any therapists, psychologists, psychotherapists? A few? Not too many. Okay. Oh, there's one. So welcome, my name is Ashley, and it's such an honor to be here with my greatest mentor and one of my dearest friends, Dr. Ron Alexander. Thank you so much for joining us.
Very welcome. It's a pleasure.
We actually practice psychology, psychotherapy together in Santa Monica. I was lucky enough to claim him as a mentor and also supervisor. I'm still an intern, actually. I'm just getting licensed shortly, as soon as I take my exams. But we have a practice in Santa Monica. So I'll just start with a little introduction of who I am and how this practice has evolved for me, and then I'll turn over to Ron as a little introduction, and then we'll get into the heart of everything. I've been teaching yoga for 13 years in Santa Monica. Started at Brian Kest's Power Yoga in Santa Monica, and then now I'm at Exhale in Venice. And for me, the practice, as all of us, helps us find our true north. And what happened for me as I was teaching over really the first few years and started to notice so many people in class having these breakthroughs, having emotional releases on the mat, or coming up to me after the practice and wanting to talk about certain issues or things, relationships, career. And I realized I had no vocabulary. I didn't really understand a lot of what was going on in their bodies. I could see it happening. I had some intuitive hits, but I didn't really have the skill set to help people take their yoga into the next level of really doing the deeper inner work of emotional transformation and psychological transformation, transforming our communication skills, our relational skills. And I had a couple of dear friends, one, Daniel Stewart, who also works with us in our office in Santa Monica, and my other dear friend and sister, Hala Khoury, who had gone back to school and got their master's in psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute. And I could see with them, they were both yoga teachers and then got their master's, this whole other skill set. And so I went and checked out Naropa, checked out Pacifica, and then decided to go there and get my master's because I really wanted to evolve my practice and my skill set. And then also, actually, my original doorway into the practice was through Ram Dass. I was introduced to him very early. It was my first introduction to yoga was through Ram Dass. My friend Govind Das handed me a tape that ages me a little bit to tell you it was actually a cassette tape that he gave me. And I listened to it in my car, this tape, Dying into Life of Ram Dass. And for those of you that may not be familiar with Ram Dass, I'm sure many of you are, but he was a great psychologist at Harvard back in the day in the 60s, and then went over to India and found his guru, Neem Karoli Baba. And so when he came back and he was bringing back these amazing teachings of the practice of yoga, he was able to lens it through a Western psychological model and really reach such a large audience because of his vocabulary and his experience. So I listened to Ram Dass's tapes voraciously, and that was my entree into the practice, as well as doing asana and power yoga, vinyasa yoga. So I was really curious about the deeper teachings of the practice and how to weave those into my class, and then how to help, get this information to people in a way that they could understand. I come from a, farming community in Bloomington, Illinois, and for me the question was always, okay, how do I take these great mystical teachings and esoteric teachings and really translate them for my cousins in the Midwest, or my brother-in-law on Wall Street, and going back to school and getting a master's in psychology and being able to lens it through that was really helpful. And so then I finished my master's, and I actually wrote my thesis on the integration of yoga and psychology and how they can both serve each other and where the holes are in each of the practices. Where does yoga leave off and the Western psychotherapeutic model pick up in terms of trauma release, communication skills, relationships, and where are the holes in the Western medical model of the mind and psychology, and where do the spiritual teachings and Eastern teachings of yoga, meditation, Buddhism really help us understand our spiritual nature and the role of the body in our transformation and in our awakening. So I've been practicing as a psychotherapy intern for the last 5 years and just getting licensed. And that's just a little bit about my history. And Ron?
Okay, my history is, when I was 20 years old, I was a student at UMass Amherst, and I had just transferred from University in Boston. And the very first week of school that I was in Amherst, I started to experience enormous amounts of anxiety and depression, because I had a close family, and I had never been separated from them in Boston. And so I had all these physiological symptoms that I didn't even know what the word anxiety was. All I knew is that my heart was pounding and I was sweating all the time. And so I went to the student health services, and the intake person said, would you like to work with somebody like really traditional and psychoanalytic and kind of has a pipe, or would you like to work with this young guy? He's like 27 years old, and he just spent 2 years on a Rockefeller fellowship touring India, Nepal, Bali, and Thailand, studying yoga and meditation. And at that point in my life, I didn't know what yoga and meditation was, but I said, I think I'll go with that guy. And so we were meeting, in the very first session. He said, well, what you have is you're having anxiety and panic attacks. And he said, I can either give you medication, or I can teach you how to meditate. So what of the two would you like? And because I had grown up in Boston, and I'd been familiar with all the music bands that came over from England, like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, I was very influenced. And I faintly remember all the sitars and the Om music and the Moody Blues. And I said, well, definitely meditation. So that's the path that I'd like to go. And then he quickly said, wow, you're one of the few students that's ever refused free drugs. So he gave me an assignment, and we would do 20 minutes of talking therapy. And then he'd say, let's sit down on the floor together and let's meditate. And he taught me pranayama and how to chant. And we would do this over the course of 8 to 12 weeks. And then one Friday night, and I was feeling very, very isolated and alone, I wandered into the student union. And at UMass Amherst, the student union, it's about 20 stories high, and it's multi-layered. And there's a kind of a room like this, way, way down in the bowels of the underground. And I heard this sound, a Om, and it was the sound of like about 200 people chanting it. And so I got to the room and opened the door and just went in and respectfully sat in the back and closed my eyes. And at this point, I'd never had meditated in this incarnation. And I closed my eyes, and they were all in Shavasana. And there was a little yogi dressed in white from India sitting on the stage, and he was with his eyes closed. And I immediately closed my eyes, and I put my hands in a mudra, and I didn't even know what a mudra was, but I just, Jnana mudra. And then this voice came to me, and it said, welcome home, welcome home, welcome home. So that was really the beginning of my transformation and my interest in how to apply mindfulness meditation and yoga to yoga psychology. And so today in our talk, we're going to be shuttling back and forth between those. And if we have time, we'll also talk a little bit about the relationship between yoga and mindfulness and how to use the breath to move trauma through the body. And so from that time, I had the unique opportunity to study with a lot of Tibetan, Zen, Vipassana yoga masters in India, Nepal, Thailand, Sri Lanka, and integrate it with Western contemporary psychology. So the place that I come from is not just one, but both. I really believe that the way that we can make ourselves most whole and come into the oneness in the union is by integrating the East and the West. So thank you, Ashley, for inviting me to be here with you. It's a thrill.
Bagged him. He didn't have a choice. And Kundalini too, right? You did
Oh
Kundalini?
yeah, and then I'm one of the first, talked about that last year with Shiva, with the Woodstock thing. If you rent the movie Woodstock, there's a series of scenes in it, and different teachers of us are teaching Kundalini Yoga. I was one of the very first Kundalini Yoga teachers in the West, and I taught that for about 5.5 years all over the USA. And so I sometimes integrate with my partner, Dana, who's a yoga teacher also, Kundalini Yoga Kriyas as a way of setting the stage for opening up your electromagnetic field and opening up the heart space. So I think that there's a very good usefulness of using pranayama and various forms of yogic breathing to set yourself in order to, in the same way that when I was in Boston, I used to play in a band as a young guy, and you always attune your instrument. And so even before I go to work every day as a therapist in Santa Monica, I get up at 5, and I either do the first series of Ashtanga, or I sit and meditate for 30, 40 minutes, and I tune my instrument. And I find that the nature and the quality of the work is profoundly different when I'm in tune with myself, when I come into alignment with my own inner flow. Then I can be aligned and in the flow and the attunement with the other. And I think for those of you that are yoga teachers, also keep that in mind, whether it's doing your practice before you teach your class, or you take 5 or 10 minutes to meditate, go inside and tune in.
So I think it's so interesting that there really is a movement in the yoga world right now of incorporating more. From my perspective of practicing for 17 years and teaching for 13 years, and I've seen the wave and the transition from this, typical asana physical practice, and it's as if we've reached a critical mass where there's enough of us that have been practicing long enough that we sort of get to the next layers of the practice and start asking different questions. So how do we really take this off the mat? And so we have things like Off the Mat, the foundation that's bringing it into, and my dear friends, Sean, Suzanne, and Hala, that are bringing this deep shadow work on a global scale, magnifying that. Or a lot of yoga teachers that I see now who are going back to school and getting their masters and wanting to, in psychology, and wanting to really incorporate that, or our students on the mat who are having these breakthroughs. What we have in the West, in the Western medical model, is, we're rooted in this Newtonian Cartesian split, which is our whole educational system, medical model is based on this splitting and this dissection and compartmentalization of self. And so we look at the physical symptoms, we keep it in the physical body. We look at the mind, Newtonian physics is a mechanical physics, that everything has its component parts. And then the Cartesian split was when Descartes, and the French philosopher, said, I think, therefore I am. So we then identified and centered our whole philosophy and structure around the thinking mind. And in the East, we have this very holistic model, which is the yogic model of the koshas, and recognizing that we are holographic. We have these 5 layers of self, which are all intertwining, inseparable, and directly affecting each other. And so the benefit of the yoga practice is that as we're on our mat, we're affecting change on all levels. And so it doesn't really matter if someone comes to the mat thinking that they're going to get strong and flexible, which is probably the majority of people that are coming onto their mat. They will begin to have other breakthroughs and new awarenesses and aha moments and new thought forms that are birthed out of their physical practice, out of the practice of slowing down the breath, tuning into pranayama, how prana begins to affect the brain waves and take us into a more alpha state, which literally stretches the space between our thought forms. When we're in a more alpha state, there's more space between our thought forms. So then in that pocket between the thought form, we have an opportunity to observe which thought do I want to pay attention to, right? So these are the natural byproducts of the practice. So we're just going to talk today a little bit about this splitting of soma and psyche, and I'm going to start with the etymology of those words, and then the unification, which is really the aim of psychology and yoga. We have the same aim, which is cohesion, which is unification, the union, the yoking. That we live in a dualistic world. We have the yin and the yang, feminine, masculine, Ida Pingala, Hatha. And we also live in this non-dualistic where there is a unified field of consciousness. And how do we connect this individual Atman, this individual molecule of self, molecule of water, with the Brahman, with the infinite, with the whole oceanic field of consciousness? So that all these practices that we're doing are serving to build those bridges and strengthen our ties to that unified field. In other words, the healing comes from when we shift our identity from the separate individual self to the infinite. And we see this most often and most explicitly in our relationships, and specifically in our romantic relationships. I'm really right in the heat of this right now in my life, and watching the reflection of someone else, and how is this person myself, right? I'm teaching my workshop today, the yoga of relationships. So that in our relationships, which is what many people come to therapy for, help in their relationships or wanting to be in a relationship, family issues, marital issues, depression, anxiety, how do we seek that union? How do we build bridges? And one of the most important and foundational ways is to shift our identity to this larger field. So soma itself comes from the word in Greek, which means body. And interestingly, it also in scientific fields, soma is the body of a cell. So we're talking about the quantum field and our cellular structure, the body of the cell where the dendrites and the axons extend from. So the soma, how does that carry our cellular structure? How does it carry our psyche? And in the Rig Veda, in Sanskrit, soma also translates to mean this divine elixir of the gods. It it's translated as the moon or nectar. And so soma can refer to this divine elixir, the amrita, or the drink of immortality. So we often hear about Indra and Agni that are copiously drinking soma. And so if we pull that out into the mythology or the symbolism of what is soma, the drink of the gods, the immortality, it's that connection with that infinite field. And then we translate it, and it's been translated through time to mean body. So if we can take body as a gateway into the infinite, right? It's a very tantric practice, right? Recognizing this physical body, this container, this biomechanical computer as actually the portal that connects us into the infinite realm. So there's the Soma Mandala is a part of the Rig Veda, and those of you who may not be familiar with the Rig Veda, it's considered by many to be the most ancient spiritual text on the planet. And the Soma Mandala is 114 hymns that are in praise to Soma, in praise to this life-giving force, this elixir of the gods. So the body itself. So I'm just going to read a passage which I think is so beautiful. This is a verse from the Rig Veda 191:22. O Soma, you alone create the medicines that heal us. So I invite you to just translate and substitute this word soma for body. How can we use our body as this portal? O Soma, you alone create the medicines that heal us. You alone create the water that quenches our thirst. You alone create all moving objects, sense organs, and living beings, and also give us this life, this body, this life. You have provided expanse to this universe, and you alone enlighten the world to eradicate darkness. So the Soma Rasa, the nectar of the gods, as it lives in this physical body. And so from the Western model, this is one of the great holes in the traditional Western psychotherapeutic model of just looking at the mind, just looking at our mental habits and practices. But now we have, of course, many other schools of psychology that are exponentially growing: somatic psychology, mind-body psychology, yoga psychology, Gestalt, that incorporate the body. So how do we use and recognize the body as a reflection, right? Soma also means moon. So moon is a reflection of sun. So how is our physical body a reflection of psyche? What is happening in our physical body? How can we learn as yogis and yoginis? This is our whole practice. It's about becoming more and more subtle in our sensory organs, so that these 5 sensory organs can begin to pick up pieces of data and information that weren't previously available to us, because we're training ourselves to become more subtle. As Dr. Ron was saying, as in Kundalini Kriyas or meditations or pranayama, of course, asana, which opens up our nadis, these 70,000 meridians and nadis, which are coursing electrical impulses. That's really how consciousness moves through this physical bodies, electrical impulses, down through the nerve endings, through the dendrites, so that more of our tissue starts to wake up. So we start to feel much more subtly, so that in our asana practice, all of a sudden, we float into Bakasana, or we float into handstand. After so much time of laying down new pathways, of laying down new wiring, pieces, cellular tissue of our body starts to wake up, starts to become effulgent with consciousness itself. And so psyche, the word psyche comes from the Greek word which means life. Life in the sense of breath. And psyche now translates to our whole mind, conscious and unconscious mind. But interestingly, it's rooted in the word for breath in Greek. So our psyche is very much transferred on breath, on our pranayama. So one of the most immediate changes that we can experience, positive byproducts of the practice, is through our pranayama, starting to train our soma, starting to train our body as well as our psyche. The psyche, breath is the bridge between the conscious and unconscious mind. It brings us from the sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic nervous system. In other words, the breath is the only function in the body that we can control consciously or unconsciously. It's just happening on its own all the time. And there are some yogis that can control, digestion or circulation, this kind of stuff. But for most of us, the breath is the main bridge that we can control consciously and unconsciously. So we can use the prana, we can use pranayama to start to decipher and stir up more and more of that unconscious material. It rises to the surface during our practice. So we have these aha moments, or we start crying in pigeon pose, or we have flashbacks and memories that come through various asanas. And this is the whole function of somatic psychology, somatic mind-body psychology. So I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Okay. That was lovely. In somatic psychology, what we're working for is the same pathways that we're working in yoga when we're practicing our asana practice, is to root into the body. George Goodhart, who was a very famous healer, he was a chiropractor from the Midwest, he said, the body never lies. The body never lies. And that the body is a wonderful vehicle and tool if you begin to become mindfully aware and you begin to start listening to what your body is speaking to you about, especially in the form of pain, imbalance, disease, although I like to call it dis-ease, or the lack of energy. And Alexander Lowen, who was a very famous, one of the very early body therapists that I studied with, he was a psychoanalyst. And his wife started to get into yoga in New York City. And so she would come home from yoga class after a long day of working, and she was also a therapist, and she'd be filled with energy and vitality. And he would come home and he'd sink on the couch and he'd be completely wiped out. He'd have no energy and he'd be irritable and complaining. And so he said to her, where do you go 3 times a week that makes you feel so good, because I feel so bad? So, of course, he followed her into yoga class. And then he started to, because he was a scientist and a psychoanalyst, he started to take yoga postures and he brought them into the psychoanalytic treatment room. And the first thing he got was a round barrel. And he asked people, because he learned about bow pose, he had people lay over the barrel and he would have them breathe. And then he noticed that they started releasing feelings, started yelling, raging. They started to release painful, traumatic memories. Then he noticed that if you put people in down dog, but you keep them there for like 5 or 10 minutes, like defiant oppositional behavior starts to show up, and people say they don't want to do it and they want to quit. And so it would move it all the way into the early development of relationships between parents and children. And so as I started as a very young graduate student, and I was immersed in Kundalini Yoga, and I was also studying Buddhist mindfulness meditation, I started to work with some of the early masters in Gestalt therapy, and Gestalt therapy means whole or one. And there's a famous saying in it, and it says, we lose our mind to come into our sensations. So that the healing process, and Gestalt means whole, it means the unification of one, in the same way yoga means union, the yoke, the integration between mind and body. And oftentimes I find when patients come into my office and they're really anxious and they're not present, and the first thing that I'll do is I'll notice that they're talking a mile a minute, and instead of listening to what they're talking about, is I'll say, stop. Now let's take 5 or 7 to 12 breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth. And of course, nobody wants to do that. But then I'll instruct it again, and then I'll notice it'll start to come down from the mind into the body. Because the body is really, it's our vehicle for how our soul, by engaging psyche, it starts to awaken. Our soul awakens us up through our body. And so that when you start to have pain in the body, when it's not from like a physical injury from yoga class, or you fall off your bicycle, or you're out rock climbing and you fall, but when you start to have pain that simply emerges, that's your soul speaking to your psyche, that then is speaking to your physical body to wake up and to listen. I have a funny story, which when I was 24, my guru connected me to my former wife, whose name was Ishwara. And we had an arranged marriage, because that's what we did in the 70s in Kundalini Yoga. So I knew her for 3 days. And so a year into the relationship, we were so different. I'm type A, driven, multi-complex, and she's very calm and kind of, she went off after we got divorced to live in Maui in the jungle and still is living there. And so about a year into the marriage, I developed an old man's disease, which is, I had a prostate disorder. And nobody at 24 gets this. So I would go to these urologists at Cedars-Sinai, where I had the Center for Health and Healing. I went to 2, 3, 4. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody could figure it out. And they'd all say, this is an old man's disease. And then I went to this one guy who practiced meditation, and he said, I think what you should do is you should call this guy. He's in his 80s, and he's a master. And he lives out in Phoenix, Arizona. And he knows a lot about hypnosis, and he knows a lot about meditation. And I think you should call him and go out and see him. So I call him up, and his name was the famous Milton Erickson. And he was a very renowned hypnotherapist who had a deep appreciation for meditation, because as a little boy he got polio, and he became crippled, and he spent most of his life looking out the window at other children playing. But he discovered naturally how to go into a trance state, how to listen to his body, and how to be quiet and still. So I call him up, and the first thing he says to me is he doesn't ask me anything. And he says, okay, what's the problem? So I said, well, I got this old man's disease. It's called prostatitis. And he goes, are you a Catholic? And I go, yeah. And he goes, are you Irish and also from Boston? I said, yeah. I said, are you psychic? And he goes, no, I spend a lot of time quiet in my wheelchair. He goes, come out Wednesday at 9 o'clock. We'll fix the problem. So me and some friends from the ashram, we drive out to Phoenix. We go into his living room. We sit down. And the very first thing that he does is he's got a bowl of strawberries. Now, my favorite fruit, since I was a little boy, is strawberries. So he's got a bowl of strawberries. He picks a strawberry up and he says, do you like strawberries, Sonny? And I'm just gone. I'm like in a trance. And he goes, sit down over here. So he starts talking to me and he puts me in a guided meditation. And then he's talking to me in trance for a couple of hours. Then he wakes me up and he says, you live over by UCLA, don't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, I want you to go to one of those t-shirt shops. And I want you to get a t-shirt that says, why should we inflict pain on ourselves in order to do the right thing? Why should we inflict pain on ourselves in order to do the right thing? And so that was his way of hypnotically communicating to my unconscious and to my body that the symptom of prostatitis, it was my psyche was waking me up that it was time to leave that relationship. And so very shortly after that, I left the relationship and went to the doctors at Cedars-Sinai, and I didn't have prostatitis anymore. So it's a wonderful example of how in both somatic psychology and yoga psychology, how we're listening and we're utilizing what the body is saying to us, particularly in the form of pain. And pain is a wonderful pathway from symptom to solution. So in some way, if you're having pain, it's a really good idea to say, bring it on. Intensify it. Take me into it. And that's what we do with mindfulness practice. Is instead of trying to get out of the pain or to get away from the pain, we want to go deeply into the pain. We want to root in the same way that we do when we're doing yoga. We want to root into our body and then go into a mindful state of listening to what is the pain speaking to us about. And remember, pain in the body is often revolving. There's a wonderful book by John Sarno from New York City. He's an MD, and it's called Free Yourself from Pain. It says that when pain is floating, meaning that when it moves around the body, it has to do with psyche and soul. So that pain, even though it's uncomfortable, pain also has a very, very deep inner meaning to it. It's a wonderful vehicle for taking you from one way station in life, from one stage of evolution, into the next way station. And last thing I want to say about yoga psychology is in Buddhism, what we say is before you can become nobody, you have to learn to become somebody. And what that means is before you learn to drop the self and to drop the ego, you need to learn to own yourself and own your ego. And the best way to do that is to learn it through owning your body. And we'll do some experiential stuff.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about the chakras. So everything that you just said about pain and understanding, and one of the great benefits of the science of yoga, and what I use is really the doorway to open psyche inside the body for people is, of course, the chakra system, because it's a really practical mapping of how psyche, soul, physical body, emotional body, all of the koshas interact. So the chakra system can be looked at as a developmental psychology, and it's really practical. I know when I first started doing yoga for years, I mean, I would see, that long banner of the yantras of the yoga of each of the chakras, and it just like made no sense to me, and I would roll my eyes like, my God, what is this? Like, you can feel your chakras spinning? What does that even mean? But then over time, it very gradually by osmosis started to land for me in my own practice, and then in writing my thesis and really diving into this science of the chakra system and understanding a lot of the workshops. Actually, my book, Aroma Yoga, is broken down by the chakras, and it's very concise because I wanted to give it to people in a really digestible way. So when you look at the physical body, this spectrum of light or the spectrum of consciousness is very much moving from our most primal aspect, or most tangible physical aspect of self, the root chakra and Muladhara, to our more refined, intangible aspect of self. So Sahasrara is where we actually move into the formless state, where we're connecting with the infinite. But each chakra governs certain areas of the body, certain organs, and very specifically certain glands in the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is a really good landing point. And those of you that are teachers, it's a great way to land the chakras for your students so they can begin to make sense of it in a way that's practical. What are the different hormones that are being released in these glands? What are the biochemical effects in the body because of that hormone release? And then because of that biochemistry change, what is the shift in my thought forms, right? So each of the chakras governs certain area of the body, but then also certain stages of psychological development. So if you look at the normal path of a human life, the natural arc, moving from a baby, unable to feed itself or even sit up, to crawling, to walking, and then the psychological stages that accompany each of that. It's landed. So the first chakra is developed from 0 to 12 months, our basic sense of safety, psychological safety and security in the world, our sense of trust or mistrust, which entirely relies on our relationship with our parents. Were they consistent? Did they show up? Did we know they were going to be there? Was there positive mirroring consistently so that I begin to see through that mirroring a positive reflection of myself, right? And then second chakra from 12 to 24 months, 48 months actually. That's the phase of walking, the phase of crawling, locomotion, beginning to have a sensual experience of the world, where all of a sudden it's not just survival, security, keep on living, but what is my sensate exploration of the world? This is what I desire. This feels good. This doesn't feel good. Then we move into the third chakra, which Ron was just speaking about, which I think is so important in yoga psychology and yoga in general, spirituality, this sense of our power center or our ego. When we get into the third chakra, it's our belly center, it's our digestive tract, but it's our formation of autonomous, individual ego sense of self. And I'm watching my niece right now, who's 2.5, and this is the stage of the terrible 2s and the terrible 3s. From 24 to 48 months is the development of our sense of ego, our ego self. So the most common word in that stage is no, right? No, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. This is that. But it's developing healthy boundaries, healthy sense of who I am. So it's where we have nothing to hide, we have nothing to prove. That's a healthy, balanced, sattvic ego state versus a high ego, someone that's always trying to prove something, versus a low ego, thinking that I'm less than. So we want to build that sattvic ego. And in spiritual, a lot of spiritual practices, including what I hear a lot in yoga classes, transcend the ego, slay the ego. And we do, in many ways, want to transcend it, but only once it's been integrated. And so this is one of the key functions of much psychotherapeutic work, is to help someone build a healthy ego strength, to help go back in and retrofit. Where are the holes in your psyche? Where are the weaknesses or the injuries or lack of sense of self, loose boundaries or too rigid boundaries, defensive, right? And then we move into the heart center, which is graduating from just this autonomous individual self to a sense of, it's the only chakra that has a horizontal axis, which is the arms. So it's the energy of a hug, of union, of love, of joy, of coming together. So we begin to identify the other as the self. This is the yoga of relationships. And transcend into that full holistic expression. Enlarge our identity beyond just individual needs and desires. And then the fifth chakra, throat, where speaking our truth, how do we communicate to the world? Can we easily communicate our needs, our wants, our desires, and our creativity, the inspiration that we're downloading that's coming through us? How easily do we express that freely to the world and give our gifts to the world? So I encourage you to take Suzanne Sterling's class. I think it's on Friday. Sing Yourself Awake. If you have any issues in throat chakra, in speaking clearly, in creative expression, if you're holding back, her class is amazing, and she is really the just master of this. She has it put together, amazing work on that. And then sixth and seventh, sixth, the third eye center, again, thinking symbolically. So how do these different parts of our physical body, what is the actual mechanism of the physical body, and how does that translate into our psychological body? So we have the eyes for the sixth chakra, the third eye center, and the eyes, the function of the eyes is to take in light and then refract it and lens it back. So what is our lens that we're filtering everything through in our life? What are your stories? How can you start to change your stories? How can you literally start to reshape? It's like getting glasses or contacts. How can you correct your vision? And this is so much the practice of yoga, is how can we start to enlarge? And it takes a lot of stability and grounding and feeling secure in ourselves and humble, and that humility comes from an integrated ego, right? Nothing to prove, that we don't have to be defensive when someone's reflecting to us an error in our vision, an error in our story, right? Again, I go to romantic relationships or any relationships, but we know romantic relationships is just so obvious. It's so in our face, right? So the function of the eyes to see clearly. And the third eye center, the third eye is really about seeing beyond this dualistic, bifurcated, right and wrong, left and right, you and me, inside, outside, into a unified field of consciousness where we don't even need to label anything. And this is really the function of depth psychology, which we both practice, of Jungian psychology, of not needing to pathologize things, right? And we're talking about symptoms and pain, not needing to name it as wrong or overly identify with it. Just observe, so, and this too. So we move out of needing to value or the gradation of right and wrong, better than, worse than. And we get into that spiritual lens of the third eye center. Our third eye starts to open into the field of all possibilities. We can actually see something from someone else's perspective. And then the seventh chakra is really that connection with the infinite. What is your spiritual connection? Can you consistently identify yourself with yourself as God, yourself as goddess, yourself as that life-giving force, that you are the source of love and wisdom and joy and happiness in your world? And so there's a lot of practices that help us root that bridge so that when we're in relationship or we're going through heartbreak or our bank account or stock market drops or we go through divorce or whatever it is, a physical illness, can we stay connected to the Brahman? Can we stay plugged in that I am the source, that I am connected? And so that in yoga psychology is how it differentiates from just traditional psychotherapy, that we're really working with spiritual psychology with our clients, with our yoga students. How can we help them plug in and root down and change their identity? And so the last thing I just want to say before I think we open it up for questions is this is happening, this whole context of healing and reflection is happening in the yoga room. It's something I'm really passionate about teaching and helping students and teachers understand, because it's hard to fit all this information into a typical 200-hour yoga teacher training. But the reality is there's a lot of psychodynamics that are going on in the yoga room, similar psychodynamics that go on in a therapy room, where you as a yoga teacher are holding that container of healing for your students. And your students don't realize it, because most students aren't coming, like when you sign up for therapy, you kind of know a little bit that what you're getting into. You're asking for it, right? But a lot of people that are walking into your yoga classes, they don't know what they're going to get. They think they're going to get strong and flexible, which they will, probably at some point along the way. And the psychological, emotional upheaval that starts to emerge is often unbeknownst to them. So holding a strong container, holding safety, knowing that you as a teacher are modeling for people what it is to have a healthy ego, how to clearly express and speak clearly and authentically, how to be transparent and humble, how to be strong and courageous. You're modeling that for them. You're providing for them a corrective experience. You're providing for them a safe container where they can start to experience their own shadow material or their own deeper core wounds, and they begin to emerge and arise. And how do we hold that space for them in a way that's really healing and safe? Go ahead.
Do we have time? We'll each teach a quick kriya so that they have a sense of the body.
Definitely.
So just to make this practical, would everyone stand up? And this is going to help you. It's a simple yoga kriya to help you attune yourself to the somatic intelligence in your body. So place your toes about 12 inches apart and bend your knees. First start out, put your hands on your hips. And then interlock your hands behind your back. And stretch up, and then look all the way up. And then begin to start doing breath of fire, which is the rapid abdominal breath in and out. And then as you're breathing, close your eyes and pay attention to what are you experiencing in your body. And notice if anything is floating through the mind's eye. Deep breathing. Now take a deep in breath. Hold the breath. Breathe all the way out. Deep inhale. Breathe all the way out. Deep inhale. Breathe all the way out. And then take your left hand and put it on the heart center and the right hand on the back of the base of the sacrum. And then bend your knees as your toes are facing each other. And then just begin to breathe long, slow, and deep into the nostrils, out to the mouth. And pay attention, what is opening up in the heart center? What might you be releasing at the base of the spine? Long, deep breaths into the nose, abdomen, lungs, and then emptying the lungs out to the mouth, emptying the abdomen. And paying attention what's floating through the mind's eye, what's floating through the body. Feelings, memories, sensations, emotions. And just let everything go. Holding nowhere. In yoga therapy, we believe in the somatic intelligence of the body, and the guidance is the breath. That's our compass. The breath is the compass guiding us through. Holding on and letting go. Holding nowhere.
So just maintaining this meditative awareness. It's going to bring you back to a seated position. So just quietly find a comfortable seated position, maybe cross-legged. Just close the eyes. So sit tall through the spine, the central channel. Just feel for literally finding your throne, finding yourself in an erect, poised position, but also at ease. So ribs melting in length and through the crown and the tail. And just bring index and thumb together, Jnana Mudra. The thumb represents connection to the infinite, connection to the body, the Brahman. And the index represents the ego, the ahamkara. So when you place the thumb and the index together, you're uniting that individualized sense of self with the infinite. So chin parallel to the floor, close the eyes, and spin the eyes backwards, gazing down the throat towards the heart. So just turning your antenna inward. And just like you have X-ray vision, or inner radar system, slowly begin to scan the body. Just noticing sensation, physical body, Annamaya kosha, this physical sheath, muscles, bones, organs, tissue. And just observe temperature, the sensation of the clothes on your skin, pressure, weight on the floor, anything that might be touching you. Observing the sheath of the physical shell, physical body. And then take it one layer inside Pranamaya kosha. Notice your energy body. Maybe you can actually sense Sushumna Nadi, or where the various chakras align along the central channel. Maybe not. But notice energy and how you feel energy in your body. What do you arrive here today in this moment? Do you feel awake, energized, vitality, lethargy, sluggishness? With that X-ray vision, are there any lines of tension or gripping in the energetic pranic body? Notice where you feel any ridges or holding patterns. And notice which parts of your body feel free and light. No judgment, just an observation. Density, spaciousness. And then one layer inside of that, notice what you sit here with in this moment, mentally and emotionally. Just invite in, observe your own emotional weather pattern. So what's happening for you in your life, in your family, with your loved ones, in your career, concerns, victories? Just notice the substance of your thoughts and your emotions. Some days it's sunny and bright, some days it's cloudy, murky, even stormy. Inviting in the full spectrum. And allow those emotions to rest in your body, to inhabit those states of feeling. To just become a little more present with what you feel. How does it feel to be a little sad or a little disappointed or really excited for the weekend? Falling in love, whatever your experience, how does it actually feel in your body? And then melting to the fourth kosha, Vijnanamaya kosha. Jnana means wisdom. The wisdom mind, the wisdom body. Where you can up-level like an eagle's eye perspective. Just observing all these variants along the way. Just observing the topography of your physical, energetic, emotional body. No need to create any story around it, invest in it, and no need to push it away. Neutrality, mindfulness, So. And this too. Discernment. It's your Buddha nature. In the very core of your being, also sensing Ananda, Anandamaya Kosha, like the bullseye, source of joy, of santosha, of contentment, of peace, right here, right now. Amidst all of the chaos of the outer layers, a deepening into, plugging into, that you are the sun, you are the source. Overflowing joy and shanti, peace, prem, love. So amidst these layers of being human, having emotions, having body, having mind, feel yourself here as a bubble just radiating outwards in every direction. Light or a jyoti, like the sun, just shining effortlessly, most natural thing for you to do. Just radiating. Sending blessings of love, of kindness, metta, to those around you, everyone in this room, whoever they are, everyone that ever watches this video, sending metta, loving kindness across time and space. Everyone arriving to this festival here, everyone in your life, just radiating loving kindness amidst the inevitable suffering and rising and falling. Both are true at the same time. This yoking of human, circumstance, spiritual nature. And then gently blink your eyes open and just maintain a soft half gaze. Just look around the room, notice whatever you notice, colors, shapes, things that appeal to you, things that don't appeal to you. So our boundaries become more permeable. Our boundary between the inner world and outer world, more permeable.
So thank you very much for being so attentive and peaceful and receptive. Namaste.
Yes, namaste. And we'll be around if you guys have more questions. Please let us know. Thank you so much.